Good evening. Looks like everybody is joining in. We are all live, I hope.
I got to mute people.
We'll give some time to manage, yeah.
Hold on.
And what's the stand on? She goes, "Got any more of those cookies?" I said, "It's too late." I bought the whole cookie dough. The whole tray is like 2 of them on there.
Bear with us with some technical. We'll try to fix these technical issues, and then we'll join everyone.
Yeah, I don't know why we're hearing people. I apologize.
You can mute us all.
Might want to go over and smile at them early. I don't know if the order is on. You got to click it on.
Oh. There you go. All right.
Okay, it looks like I'm unmuted, and those of us that are on the panel, and Raed, I think you are unmuted.
Well,
Raed,
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Raed,
Very
you are
good.
live.
Thank you, Paul, for taking care of these technical difficulties. I know it's not easy to do these meetings sometimes, but I want to welcome everyone who just joined us. My name is Raed Al-Shaibi. I'm the Vice President of Space Coast Progressive Alliance, and we are very excited for a beautiful event tonight. We have a great topic to discuss and to go through it, and I'll let our past president, Phil, to introduce the speakers. But before we start, I just want to share a few exciting events that's going on. And hopefully everyone is tuned in and they can listen to me. We have, first of all, we have just updated our website. Our website has been down for a while, on and off, but now we have a great website. And there's 2 buttons that I'd like to invite everyone to go there and check. One that says join and one says contribute. And I hate to start with this, but this is the only way that we can keep these beautiful programs going. We would love to get more membership, join us, and would love to get your contribution. This is the way we are able to continue produce and engage with our community. And talking about engagement of our community, we have a very, very exciting event, actually just got developed in the past week or so. As we all aware, there's a lot of unfortunate scenarios that's going on around the country, and Space Coast Progressive Alliance could not stay silent. So we were able to draft a letter to address the issue of racial injustice and some of the unfortunate scenarios that's going on with law enforcement. This letter was produced among leaders of this community in collaboration. We put it together, and 10 organizations endorsed the letter. And we were so happy that that was endorsed, and the public is all with the items that are in it and all the demands. We passed the letter to all the cities, the major cities in Brevard County. We sent it to all the officials in the county itself. And we're very excited to share that we have a beautiful event that will get us all together in one room. We will be able to address these issues face to face on September 16th, next Wednesday at 6:30. It's going to be at the Hilton, Melbourne Beach. The event will be broadcasted via a couple of links. Of course, the Zoom will be available, and also we'll have it available through our FaceTime Live. So I encourage you to join. Top city officials, city managers, chiefs of police of 4 cities, Melbourne, West Melbourne, Palm Bay, and Coco. We have some last minute now attendees from the county itself. So I think it'll be a great opportunity for us to share our frustration and also listen to our city officials and work with them to bridge the gap in these challenges that we go through. So we're very excited. Hopefully you'll be able to join us. and I'm very excited to hear about this important subject tonight. So before I pass it to Phil, I want to just share a few things about this media because it's dear to my heart. And just a quick issue. I come from the Middle East, and I was very excited in 2011 that democracy will come, and we have the Arab Springs, if everyone recalls. The excitement of having freedom in the Middle East was devastated because of the influence of the media. The media took us up, and the media, unfortunately, and the money that flew in from the Gulf countries and all the oil in the Middle East put the money back in the media in a bad way and crushed the hope of millions in the Middle East. So we're back into square one because of the influence of media. So I can't wait to listen to our speakers tonight. I'm hoping that everyone will get engaged, and hopefully we'll learn a lot from them. So I'll pass it back to Phil. Get us going, get us engaged, and let's learn. And I want to thank all the speakers who join us tonight.
Thank you very much, Raed. Again, that's Raed Al-Shaibi. He's the Vice President of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. Thank you again, and thank you for your leadership, sir. I'll tell you what, everybody, this is a wonderful night. I want to thank all of you for joining us at the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. We have a wonderful program tonight called The Perversion of Truth, Media and Democracy. We have four wonderful speakers tonight, each of which has a little bit different perspective on the importance and the function of media in our society and in our democracy. It's important to remember that the fourth estate, that is to say, the media, used to be people would talk about the press as the fourth estate, but truthfully it's now, of course, television, radio, all the new media, social media, podcasting, and that sort of thing. They are an important part of every democracy, and they have certainly been throughout the history of the United States and all democracies around the world. Good media that is functioning well brings us closer to the truth. When media does not do its job properly, of course, it can take us away from the truth. As Raed was just saying, it can lead to authoritarianism. We know what Adolf Hitler did through his propaganda machine. Stalin, some of the greatest dictators in the history of humankind have used media and the outreach to pervert people's minds. And that's why good media is so important. Tonight, we're going to be talking, each of our speakers will have a chance to make their presentation, and then we'll be following that with an opportunity to bring all of you in the audience in. Here on the Zoom function, those of you that are in the Zoom meeting, you can raise your hand. There's a little functionality, a little button that you can push. I believe it's when you go in through participants, there's a little button that will allow you to raise your hand. And then those of you that are raising your hand will call on you, and you can then ask questions of our four wonderful panelists. We'll also be recognizing at the end of our meeting any candidates, folks that are running for office. Of course, everybody knows that we have a major election that's coming up. And that's one of the reasons why this event tonight is so important, is that we need truth to select the best leaders. We need the truth in order to make the best votes, or make our votes really count on issues that are important to all of us. And so the election ballots will literally be arriving in people's mailboxes in about 2 weeks here in Brevard County. So we all need to get as much education as we can to be as informed as we possibly can. And that is why we're here tonight. I would like to say thanks, especially to Barbara Bingner, Bonnie Ida, Larry Abdullah, folks who worked to bring this event together. Paul Halpern, our Actions Project Committee here at the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, who worked to bring this, as they do every month, to bring this meeting to you. So my thanks to all of them. I think it's about time for us to take a look at that video. I know that we've got a video queued up, and it's about 2 minutes. After we're back from that, we'll welcome our panelists and get going with our panel. So if we have that video ready, let's see if we can watch.
Doctored video.
Doctored video.
Doctored video. Hi, I'm Griffin Hammond. I'm a filmmaker, and I am completely against the overuse of the phrase doctored video. Here's what happened. President Trump tweeted this video. It features a real CNN logo, but as a critical media consumer, you should notice several things. The dramatic music, the misspelled text, the font is different from CNN's. In fact, rarely does CNN look this clean. Usually there are boxes and graphics everywhere. And the Trump supporter who made this video tagged his name in the corner. To me, it reads as clear parody, the creator not trying to hide his tracks, yet a lot of the language I'm hearing treats it as a forgery rather than a joke.
Misleading edited videos.
The grotesque fabrication, digitally altered.
It was manipulated, it was faked.
Twitter even tagged it as
manipulated media.
Which is true, but that descriptor could be applied to most video. Every video is manipulated. What I choose to frame in the shot inherently leaves something else out. As an editor, I'm making aesthetic choices to crop things out, remove logos, adjust color, add text and music. While manipulated may be an imprecise term, at least it's not thrown around as indiscriminately as doctored. When Trump tweeted his head on Rocky Balboa's body, it was called doctored. These ridiculous videos were labeled doctored, as if you couldn't see the manipulation with your own eyes. It's not helpful to call every remix on the internet doctored, because we need the capacity to distinguish when video is truly faked for the purpose of lying to us. In 2019, video of Nancy Pelosi was slowed down to make it sound like she was slurring her words. That was deceptive. In 2018, the White House justified suspending Jim Acosta from press briefings by sharing a partially sped up video, making his hand movement look more violent. These are doctored videos.
It wasn't doctored. They gave a close-up view. That's not doctoring.
If you don't have a critical eye for this easy stuff, then you are fucked when it comes to the truly doctored videos. The deepfakes.
President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. You see, I would never say these things. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet.
And this doesn't even require an actor's impersonation. Artificial intelligence can analyze real recordings to build fresh, fake ones.
With this technology, they can make me say anything.
So stay vigilant, be critical of every video you watch, and let's save the terminology doctored for the videos that are truly trying to blind us from the truth.
Executive editor of our wonderful Florida Today here on the Space Coast. Prior to serving in this position, Mara worked as a journalist with the Associated Press in London, Moscow, and Kiev, Ukraine. So she certainly has seen many different angles of the journalism business. And last but not least, Dr. Melissa Dodd. She is an associate professor at the University of Central Florida, and she's the co-author of multiple referenced journal publications and book chapters, and has presented award-winning research at top-tier academic conferences around the world. So we have four wonderful presenters tonight, but let's start off with our friend Bob Gabordi. Bob, you have the floor. Looks like you may need to unmute yourself. I'm not sure how that's working.
Yeah. Hold on. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Bob, you are live. Yes, sir.
All right. So first of all, I want to thank you for asking me back. I always enjoy speaking to this group. And I want to especially thank you for not forgetting about me. When I left Florida Today in March of 2019 after suffering a stroke in late 2018, one of the hardest adjustments for me was how much harder it was to get people to return my phone calls. I decided that I was going to write a book which I called The Truth, Real Stories and the Risk of Losing a Free Press in America, for two reasons. One is that I missed the journalism, and especially the journalists, more than I could have anticipated. And this was a way for me to immerse myself back in it again. And two, and more importantly, I really got fed up with and sickened, quite frankly, by the whole fake news thing and the attacks on the credibility of journalists. I worry more about the attacks on our credibility than I do the physical attacks, which have been on the rise. In the book, I document some of the physical attacks and threats that I've endured in my career. Being held at gunpoint by police, threats of arrest, and shooting by criminals wearing badges, phone calls to me and my wife, threatening calls from deranged people and so on. We once had a window smashed out on our car in the middle of the night while there was a police officer parked in a cruiser across the street from our house. We all deal with it in different ways, like the young investigative reporter, a former Army soldier, by the way, who I found crawled up in the fetal position under my desk in my office one day, crying and saying, "I'm not nearly as tough or as smart as you think I am." But she was, and she got up and went back to work. I've met reporters in Pakistan and have hosted more than 24 in the United States who have been beaten for what they have written or broadcast, guns held to their head, and forced by the Taliban to broadcast things that weren't true. I've never known a journalist who has quit over that kind of thing or those kinds of threats, though I'm sure that there must be some that have. On that, I'm with my Pakistani journalist who said, we're as free as our courage allows us to be. By the way, his head was still bandaged when he was saying that, and he needed crutches to walk at the time of the conversation. He had only recently been released from the hospital as a result of his injuries, all because of what he wrote about a Pakistani businessman's dealings in the United States. But the constant verbal attacks on the media, meaning reporters and journalists from legitimate news organizations, are far more dangerous and more of a threat to truth-telling than the physical attacks. In the announcement of this event, there's a sentence that says, "Dictators thrive on media that cover up information and serve them with lies that they find useful." Well, I want to suggest that that is old school thinking. The modern method is for politicians/dictators to create their own very, very powerful communications line. We see this in Brevard County, where Sheriff Ivy has set an example. He has his own media operation, complete with TV quality video. It cost a $714,000 operation paid for by taxpayers. Meanwhile, he tells his followers not to believe legitimate news sources such as Florida Today. And he's asking county commissioners for and getting budgetary increases for his critical needs. Florida Today, when they bring these things up, is faced with an audience that has doubts about them if they are not outright hostile because of any criticism of Ivy, because he has taught them that Florida Today is not critical. I've heard him go on the radio unchallenged and mischaracterizing Florida Today's positions and coverage to not only clear a path for his own narrative events, but also to hurt press that he considers less than supportive. He makes use of Facebook and other social media to tell his story, and he refuses to answer questions posed by media. And to top it off, he positions himself as a victim of anti-right-wing conspiracy. He picks and chooses which media he invites to press conferences during a worldwide pandemic, and which reporters he can trust and not trust. In other words, he doesn't have to care about media covering up for him or bother with trying to get media to serve him with lies, because he has his own very powerful media operation paid for by taxpayers. That is the threat to a free press that America faces right now. COVID-19, of course, has put additional financial burdens on the business operations of media companies of all types, corporate-owned and family-owned. I have visited some of my former communities that I served in as I researched my book, and I've taken part in discussions put on by the International Center for Journalists, and things are not pretty worldwide. Those who would destroy a free press are sensing an opportunity. One final point. I'd like to get deeper into the idea of truth-telling. The question is, as it always has been, is whose truth, right? I want to tell you a story that I reference in my book. I hosted a Turk journalist and an Armenian journalist when I was in Tallahassee. They worked jointly on a project to find out what happened to the Christian crosses on churches left behind in Turkey, or what was then known as the Ottoman Empire, during the early part of the last century. Turkey still vehemently denies that there was a Holocaust, and it is a political and legal nightmare to even talk about such a thing in Turkey. These two journalists were working to find out what happened to the crosses embedded into the stone and concrete of the church's foundations. The crosses had disappeared over the years. After months of working together, the two were to present their findings in Ankara and Yerevan, the two national capitals. I was there for their presentation in Ankara. The report quickly devolved into the Armenians saying the Turks somehow removed the crosses, and the Turks saying, no, we didn't. They had gotten no closer to agreement over what happened to the crosses than when they started. Each was wedded to a truth that they had grown up with, and they simply believed. It was quite a scene. We were all wearing the UN-style headphones, listening to the conversation in our own language. Well, this incident shows that for legitimate journalism to occur, we have to be open to ideas and points of view that test our own belief, and strongly held or otherwise. Just as importantly, so does our audiences. But that is more and more becoming a challenge, especially in the Trump age in America. Thank you, and I'll add more during the question and answer and the roundtable conversation.
Bob, thank you so much. It is an honor to have you aboard and to have your perspective here. And you are looking great, my friend. You are really looking great. We see your book in the back there. You're welcome. It's a book.
We're in the process of moving, and I'm taking everything off of the shelves. And I got to my book, and I said, no, I'm going to leave it there for the presentation. So.
Fair enough. It's great to have you. Our next speaker tonight, everybody, is Rick Brunson. And by the way, I'm just take a quick pause for those who have just joined us. This is the Space Coast Progressive Alliance meeting called The Perversion of Truth, Conspiracy, Fake News, Disinformation, Propaganda, and Alternative Facts, the importance of media to our democracy. We have four wonderful speakers. And our next speaker is Rick Brunson from the University of Central Florida. Rick, you have the floor.
Thank you, Phil. It's good to be with you again. It's good to be with this organization. And Bob, it's an honor to follow in your considerable wake, my friend. It's great to see you back in the saddle and with us tonight. And congratulations on your book. So it's great to follow Bob. So bottom line, the news media exists in this country from its founding. It was James Madison's idea, the author of the First Amendment, that we have a free press. And he made very clear in his writings why a free press exists. And in his own words, a free press is the means and the measure of keeping an eye on public figures and public measures. So the people who have the power, that we invest in them through our voting, who have our tax dollars, that we invest in them through the paying of our taxes. The press is there as a mechanism to watch our government and how they act in our name and what they do with our money. It's been that way since the beginning of the Republic. It will continue to exist that way until there is no Constitution and there is no First Amendment. God rue the day that ever happens. But so the press and the media exists for that reason. Now, you know, there are segments of it that have spun off into losing sight of that and trying to entertain us, and is, you know, driven by a different kind of motivations. But good local journalism, especially, that is a role that they continue to serve. And even though they are hobbled by a lot of financial pressures that Bob mentioned, since the pandemic between March and the end of June, the Pew Research Center, which is a nonpartisan organization that tracks the media in this country, reported that 36,000 journalists, local journalists, had been either furloughed or laid off. Here locally, one of my own former students, Chris Reyes, who is, get this now, he is the justice and safety reporter for the Orlando Sentinel, found himself after George Floyd was murdered, sitting on a couch in his apartment watching the protests on television instead of being on the street and covering them because he had been furloughed. 36,000 professional journalists off the street, either temporarily or permanently. That is a huge hit to democracy, and that is a huge hit to the watchdog function. So the number one thing that we all can do in this meeting, and I realize I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but the number one thing that we can do is pay a buck and support local news. I was in December, my colleague who's with us tonight, Melissa Dodd, put on a wonderful symposium in our downtown campus on the First Amendment. And, you know, the First Amendment, the pathway to freedom. And as part of that, she had several excellent journalists who were guest speakers. There was a panel session in the hallway prior to the symposium and the panelists. And I kind of walked around. It was crowded with lots of students. And one of the posters detailed with very good, strong, accurate data, trust in media and media brands and what that looks like right now in America. And it had a very interesting statistic, and it's that 65% of folks under the age of 35 now say that they get most of their news about politics and government on social media. At the same token, and this is what's so ironic about it, on that poster, it said that only 14% of those people actually trust the news that they see on social media. So I'm wondering, I'm looking at this and going, why would you say that you get 65% of your news from social media, but only 14% of you trust it? I mean, that's like the most insane thing that I've heard in a long time. And so I just kind of hung around, and as students were walking through, I just sort of, posed the question to some of them, what do you think of this poster? And what do you think of this statistic? If so many folks are getting their news, and they say they're getting the bulk of their news on social media, but only 14% of it, of them say that it's trustworthy, what's that about? I didn't try to pose the question in an accusing way or a condescending way, but I'm just, curious, what is that about? And, a couple of students said, well, because it's just the convenience of it. It just comes straight to your phone. You're there anyway on social media, and you sort of accidentally see the news there. But if you don't trust it, what's the point of consuming it, right? So one student, I remember, I said, I tell you what, what if I pulled $1 out of my wallet. I said, what if I were to pay for 1 month of a digital subscription to the Orlando Sentinel for you? Would you take it? And he kind of shrugged and said, well, not really, because I said, it's just $1. It's $1, for good solid news by seasoned journalists who are on the street and on the beat every day. They know the officials that they're covering. They know their audience. They know their communities. They are embedded here. They don't fly in from Washington or New York when something happens and flies out. They live here. They're one of us, right? And even I couldn't even get them for $1 to get a digital subscription. The news will come to your phone, right? And so we have some rough winds to sail when we're looking at the folks that I deal with and that Dr. Dodd will deal with who are coming up behind us. They're very media savvy. They're very smart, but we need to sell them on the idea of the difference between real news and BS. And people like Mara and people like Bob, their staffs, they are doing real news. They are putting the questions to Sheriff Ivey. They're there on the beat every day. They're in their communities, and they're serving that watchdog role that is so important for the continuance of a democratic republic such as ours. The other thing that I would bring up is this: we are still living with 3.5 years of a daily drumbeat of don't trust the news media. Now, look at this head. I'm an old guy. I'm 59. I spent 35 years in news before even becoming a professor. So I from the time I got into the news business until the time I was no longer professional, people were always complaining about the media. You don't get into this business if you want to be loved or you want people to think well of you. People have always, complained to me about the media from the left and the right, So it's easy to pick on the news media because what journalists do is public, and they do it now with less staff, with less resources, but they still do it valiantly. But this administration has daily pounded a drumbeat that you can't trust them. They're fake. They're fake. They're fake. They're fake. And if you say something loud enough, long enough, it begins to seep into the consciousness of folks. So every poll that you see, in the last 6 months about media trust from really good sources like Pew Research or like Gallup, like the Reuters Institute for the Study of Media at Oxford University, trust in news media is really down. In the Oxford study, which is 2020, it's this year, 29% of Americans say that they wholly trust the media. 45% say they trust the media that I use. It's like, I hate Congress, but I love my congressman. And brand trust is an interesting thing. Good local news is still trusted, 60%. So that's good. The BBC News, Wall Street Journal, CBS, ABC, New York Times still has high levels of trust, but that daily constant drumbeat of fake has seeped into the consciousness of a lot of Americans, and Americans of goodwill. They're not nuts or crazy or fringe. They do have a high degree of skepticism of what they see and they read, and so we who teach journalism, those of us who practice it, have to every day, never more than ever before, take care of the business of being accurate and being fair, so that we can be trusted. So I will end with that. I know we'll probably get into Bob Woodward's book that dropped, and all of the conversation surrounding that probably in our discussion. But that's all I have for now. Thank you for letting me share some thoughts.
Thank you so much, Rick. I'll tell you what, your insights are extremely valuable. I grew up many years ago. A good friend of mine was an investigative reporter for the Chicago Tribune, and wound up teaching journalism down at Southern Illinois University. And wow, what a great experience. I mean, for many of us recently have realized that our letter carriers, our mailmen, are true heroes. These are people that we never really thought a lot about before. But I would posit that, in fact, our reporters, our editors, folks in the newsroom at good, solid newspapers newsrooms, on radio stations, television. They're really heroes too. Folks that fight to tell the truth every day. It's not easy to do that. It never has been. It probably never will be. Our next speaker tonight is going to be Mara Bellaby. She is the executive editor of Florida Today, and of course our wonderful local paper here out in the Space Coast. Mara, are you with us? Can you take the floor?
I can. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Great. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here. What a great panel. I love following behind Bob Gabordi, who I was lucky enough to follow behind at Florida Today. Just a truly wonderful journalist, fantastic man, and taught me so much. So it's an honor to be on this panel with Bob. I always like to start with just telling you a little about me, and very quickly, but I think it's really important, especially in this day and age, to understand who I am, what my biases are. I've always been a journalist. It's all I've ever done, so it's all I know. I've been at Florida Today. I've been executive editor there now for about 1.5 years, but I've been there for about 14 years. It's the longest I've been in anywhere. I've touched almost every aspect of the newsroom, except for sports. I haven't done too much in sports. That's my weak point. Before that, I worked at overseas, Associated Press. I really consider kind of my teething ground as a journalist as being a foreign correspondent, and I think that makes you a slightly different journalist than others. And I loved it. I was in London and was kind of plunged headfirst into the chaotic world of international politics, international events, covering like the contact group meeting on Kosovo. The Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet had visited London for medical treatment, and a Spanish judge had him detained. There was the peace process in Northern Ireland, so a lot going on. After that, I got to fulfill a dream of mine and go work in Moscow, Russia. Again, I was in the very early stages of Putin's presidency at the time. Russia was a freewheeling place still, very much the Yeltsin era. Multiple media outlets, television, newspapers, the oligarchs were very much in control, very much running things. A lot of journalism was critical of the Kremlin, but I also got to see how that could change like in a flash. And while I was there, very quickly, Putin really clamped down. You saw oligarchs were either jailed or had to flee into exile, or they kind of became very bowed down to the Kremlin. Masked men would enter television stations and they would be off the air, and the next day a very different kind of television program and newspapers were shut, journalists harassed, some journalists were killed. And so that definitely was eye-opening for me, very informative, especially someone coming from upstate New York and never having experienced anything like that. But I also got to see another side. I got to see countries that had been part of the former Soviet Union, now independent nations. And as they, I think we mistakenly at the time would often refer to their leadership as pro-Western. Their opposition, I don't think it was, but they were trying to get out from under the Kremlin. And you saw opposition leaders emerge and media outlets, try to emerge. And that was the era of what so-called color revolutions. Some were successful, like in Ukraine and the Republic of Georgia, or they were successful for a time. Kyrgyzstan, others weren't, like Belarus. And oftentimes journalism played a big role in that. In Ukraine, it was the beheading of a journalist, Grigory Gangadze, which really motivated people and became a rallying cry against the then president. So that's kind of, where I come from and what I bring. But ultimately, the area that I can speak most, comfortably and authoritatively is local news, local journalism, Florida Today. And as others have said, our democracy, it depends on citizens being informed. It depends on them having access to information, to facts, to make decisions, to truth. That's how we as citizens hold those in power accountable. As a journalist, I often like to say, we hold those in power accountable, but to some degree, maybe that's misleading. What we do is we shine the light, we ask the tough questions, we try to ferret out facts, we write about inconvenient things, and we present that information to a public who then takes that and can hold our leaders, our institutions accountable. But they need that. That's the key. That's what ties journalism and democracy together. At the Florida Today newsroom, which I miss because we've been all working remotely, but we had signs posted up in my office and around the newsroom. And it said, if someone tells you it's raining outside and someone else tells you it's sunny, your job is not to quote both. Your job is to look out the window and find out which is true. That's critical. That gets at the truth. And that's just the essence, the cornerstone of our democracy. And I think that's why we see what I learned as authoritarian leaders come in. That's why one of the first things they do is they try to quash that access to information. They try to block the truth. They discredit and attack journalists. And right now in the world that I used to call home, we're seeing that in really stark terms. In Belarus, as we've seen with they had an election earlier this month, and Alexander Lukashenko, who's been the president and winning, quote, winning a re-election since 1994, the latest claiming with 80% of the vote, once again won. And the people rose up as they have done, but this time they keep coming and they keep coming out and they fill the streets of Minsk and they're really demanding change. Of course, he fights back with repression and with beatings, yanking kids out of schools. It's been horrific to watch, and I kind of check in. I have friends over there, but he also has really fought back with the journalism. He has expelled foreign media, journalists who are Belarusians who work for foreign media, and two of my former colleagues from AP. He's taken away their accreditation so they can no longer legally work as journalists in their home country. One has had to flee to Ukraine to cover Belarus, and the other one is a photographer. You can't really be a photographer when you're not, from beyond the borders. So he just can't do his job. We've seen in Russia now with Alexei Navalny, who was poisoned and recovering in Berlin. He's an opposition leader, a politician, but in Russia, after it was a clampdown on media, in many ways, he fulfilled that role with his anti-corruption investigations and his weekly broadcast, not on any official media. The Kremlin won't even say his name, but his weekly broadcast exposing corruption. And all of that is extreme. And as Bob mentioned, that's the one end of the scale of journalists being killed, harassed, attacked, forced into shutdowns. But it doesn't start like that. And I think that's what's so important for us to understand and aware. The kind of attack on journalism starts by discrediting journalists, by making them the enemy, by just repeating that so often that people, well-meaning, intelligent people just hear that, and it's a drumbeat. It also starts by regular people deciding that, if a news story doesn't adhere to their worldview, that it's fake, it's wrong. And that's a really tricky thing, because you get so caught up in that, of just, especially on social media, and it's this echo chamber. And I know we've talked about that, and that's not new, but it's just intense right now. I also think it can happen with people, well-meaning people on the other side, who see journalists at a moment in time in their reporting, and as they're questioning authority, and they're questioning and they kind of align, and then suddenly that journalist also, asks critical questions and does something critical of something they believe in. And it's like, hey, wait, you're not with us, you're not part of this opposition. And we're not. Journalists do stand alone, and our job is to question authority, and is to ask uncomfortable questions, and is to write inconvenient stories, and really to follow the reporting where it leads. And having a public that understands that and appreciates that is fantastic. But it's a hard thing to do, and I get it. And I think as journalists, we need to understand the environment that we're in, and I don't think we always do a good enough job at that. I think, for example, the use of anonymous sources is awfully tricky in this polarized world. Anonymous sources, it lends itself right away to those allegations of fake news and distrust. I think we have to double down on trying to explain where we got our information, where it's coming from, so people can look at that and can judge for themselves. I also think once the story's out there, we have to go the extra length to engage with people, to answer their questions, to be available. I'm sure Bob experienced this like crazy, and it's kind of was eye-opening to me how many emails I get of people really angry emails with really horrific kind of language and coming at me for things. But once we can engage and have a dialogue, I'm just shocked at how many can just turn and some, oftentimes that we don't leave it with any agreement reached. I stand by what we did. They totally disagree, but it's sort of, I've had many of them write to me, you're someone I can disagree with civilly, or, I understand better where you're coming from, what you're trying to do. And so it's that engagement. It's taking that time to listen and really listen, like the deep listening, not just kind of listening with quotes, and trying to understand them and respect where they're coming from. And when we get things wrong, and we do, we're human. And as both Rick and Bob referenced, I mean, it's, our staffs are smaller, we're dealing with furloughs, we're scrambling the constant deadlines. We do make mistakes. And when we make mistakes, we need to own them. We need to be upfront about it. We need to be, very clear about it. We need to correct it. All of that can help with the transparency and help people to understand the difference between legitimate media and illegitimate media. And perhaps I'm naive, but I really do believe that most people do want an independent media. They do recognize its importance to our democracy. I even think among politicians, and I'm not going to name any names, but even among politicians in our county, if I were to say them, I think you'd be surprised at some people who know Florida Today and some of our reporting who might think are natural enemies, who, I don't think that's the case. And I think that while they can actively dislike some of the stories that we do and the things we go after them, I still believe that there is that basic understanding and acceptance of the importance of that for independent media. But I don't think we can be complacent. I mean, these are troubling times for all the reasons that Bob mentioned and Rick mentioned. And, even looking back in history, one of the things I find myself doing more and more of, especially with this crazy election season, is trying to understand better just even US history. And one of the early presidents who I've really come to respect and like, John Adams, I mean, it was under him, who I think was a very intelligent man, the Alien and Sedition Act. I mean, terrifying. So we've been through this. We've seen even intelligent, thoughtful, educated leaders do things that take away our rights. So we can't be complacent. We have to understand what's possible out there, but we also have to all take responsibility, journalists and the public, to really respect the important role that journalism plays in our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mara. I tell you what a terrific perspective. And by the way, just to give everybody, all of our guests as well as our speakers, the Space Coast Progressive Alliance are going to be having our event next month on the edge of authoritarianism. It's going to be taking a serious look at what it's like to make that march into authoritarianism. Things that have happened in this country may be shocking and new to many Americans, but in other parts of the world, this is the way business is done. If you happen to be in South America, you've seen it happen. If you've been in the Middle East, you've seen it happen. If you've lived in places where governments have transitioned, slid from democracy into authoritarianism, it's terrifying. And the consequences are very real. And folks, for anybody that's listening, you've heard me say it before, I'll say it again, elections have consequences. In literally 2 weeks, ballots will be mailed by the Brevard Supervisor of Elections to those of us here in Brevard County. And anyone that's watching in another location, watch for your mail ballots to be mailed. If you are not voting by mail, this is the biggest election of our lives. People say it every year. I'll tell you what, folks. This is it. This is the big one. And you've got to vote. Everybody that can vote should vote. Anyway, thank you again so much, Mara. And our final speaker tonight will be going in just a moment. I would like to remind everybody that we have a couple of candidates here that we're going to be recognizing. Any candidate from any party that is in our audience that would like to speak, we'll be giving you 2 minutes each to brief us, and that'll be coming up after our candidates, or after our panel finishes speaking. So our final speaker tonight, Melissa Dodd. She is a doctor, a PhD, and for the an associate professor at the University of Central Florida. Melissa, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Phil. Sorry about that title, Associate Professor, University of Central Florida, Nicholson School of Communication and Media. Thanks so much for inviting me tonight, Raed, Bill, members of the SCPA. If you like, you can follow me. I'm to speak to the social media aspect very specifically based on my background and research. And so if you would like to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, my handle is @MellyDodd, MELLYDODD. So feel free to reach out to me, connect with me in those spaces. Also LinkedIn @MellyDodd. So I'd just like to start by saying thank you so much, Bob, Rick, Mara, for sharing these really beautiful stories as journalists and your experiences. I now have to apologize in advance because I'm a researcher and I speak like one too. So hopefully you all can hang in there with me. So this topic obviously is so important to our future as a country and across the globe now more than ever. I was asked to focus on.
Uh-oh. What happened?
We've lost you for just a moment, Doc. Hopefully we'll get you right back. Little technical glitch.
Can you hear me?
I don't know.
We've got you back. We now have you 5x5.
I don't know what happened. That technology stuff. So I'm focusing on briefly on the role of social media in the perversion of truth, media, and democracy, especially as we move toward the November 2020 presidential election. I want to start by I wouldn't be doing my scholarly duty if I didn't define the concepts to be addressed tonight. And as you all know, and as is part of your work and part of mine, a basic premise of the work that many of us do is that words are important. Words have meaning. Words are powerful, and what we say matters. So that said, defining my terms, the term fake news is employed generally inconsistently and has multiple interpretations. As you know, it's often used by President Trump to dismiss, that would be my buddies, working from home. It's his 10th birthday today. Shh, buddy, so sorry. As you know, fake news is a term often used by President Trump to dismiss news that is not factually inaccurate or misleading. It's a term he uses to dismiss news that he does not agree with. Other terms, such as alternative facts, used by Kellyanne Conway, they just serve to really highlight the reasons for the distrust in information that the American public receives right now. Of course, if you're familiar, my favorite term for all of this is Stephen Colbert's truthiness. So the preferred words or terms that better serve to identify this inaccurate information are disinformation and misinformation. Disinformation being the deliberate spread of misleading or biased information, whereas misinformation is the spread of that misleading information, but not necessarily with the sender having harmful intentions. The sender, it may not be within their knowledge or their media literacy to understand that the information that they're sharing is bad. So one small thing, I really enjoyed Mara had so many great, really actionable recommendations. So one small thing that we can all do right now to quell the spread of disinformation and misinformation is to use the power of these words to more accurately describe our current information ecosystem. We can create consistency and provide clarity to the concepts in order that we and the American public may better understand them. So now, often referred to, I'd like to just sort of detail some of the ways that social media is being used to spread disinformation using artificial intelligence, cyber bots, etc. So in the scholarship and mainstream literature, they're often referred to as cyber troops. Some methods of these cyber troops, which are organized groups, often state-sponsored in many countries, and often partnered with strategic communication firms who contribute to their social media presence. So how do these cyber troops spread disinformation via social media? One way that they do that is with fake accounts. You all are probably familiar with bots or automated accounts that are designed to mimic human behavior online. They amplify the narratives of the cyber troops, and then they drown out any political dissent. Another way is manipulated media, to include memes, fake news websites used to mislead the public. And furthermore, these manipulated media may be targeted towards specific segments of social media users through employing user data, buying user data, or paying for targeted ads on social media sites. I believe that the video that didn't necessarily work for us in the Zoom was an example of this manipulated media, the racist baby video. And finally, and this is something I think that the former speakers really did just a really fantastic job adding detail and context to, is the harassment and trolling of social media users, journalists, or political dissenters is largely employed by these cyber troops online to spread misinformation, disinformation, ultimately with the aim of controlling information control. So a few facts to note: there's been a tremendous rise in disinformation spread using social media. A few studies. In 2019, a study by Oxford University found evidence that organized social media manipulation campaigns have taken place in 70 countries. That is a 150% increase from when they began gathering data in 2017. A 2018 Twitter analysis by the Knight Foundation found the influence of disinformation on the 2016 US presidential election, finding that many of the accounts that were active in 2016 spreading disinformation campaigns continue to operate despite clear evidence of the automated activity. The US Department of Justice says the 2020 US presidential election will be no exception to the threat of disinformation perpetuated by foreign malicious actors who want to undermine our democratic institutions. Experts do conclude that disinformation will increase dramatically in intensity and frequency as the 2020 election in November draws near. To provide an example that you might be able to relate to, I'll discuss the deep fake videos. If you're unfamiliar, they're called deep fakes. They're a video in which a person in an existing image or video or audio is replaced with someone else's likeness or voice. In other words, the content is manipulated to misrepresent. So you may be familiar with the viral spread of the doctored video of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tweeted by President Trump in 2019. The video was a mashup of Pelosi's speaking, and the video was slowed down and sped up, and the pieces that were cut out were intended to make her look drunk, incapacitated, slurring her words. Trump and Fox News used the video to prompt speculation about Pelosi's health and competence. Ultimately, the video was removed from YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter, and later Facebook. But at the time it was removed, which was very shortly after it began to spread, it had already received more than 200 million views on YouTube and had been shared 91,000 times on Facebook. You can still find it if you would like, obviously, to this day. So earlier this summer, the House Intelligence Committee met to examine the risk posed by these deep fakes, or the artificial intelligence technology that can create these realistic looking fake videos. The concerns of the committee were largely concerned with the creation of disinformation campaigns by foreign nations such as Russia and for election interference ahead of the November election. An extreme then disinformation campaign could in fact include deepfake videos of presidential candidates saying something they never said. Then that might go viral. So for 2020, we need to be on the lookout for these potential deepfake videos that could then go viral and impact the election outcome. I think that we can consider this in relation to how impactful the Mitt Romney's 2012 videotape about the 47% was. If you recall, Romney said 47% in a hidden video. Romney said 47% of the country is dependent on the government. And it was, you can imagine how a deep fake video could be election altering if Romney's video that received so much coverage and ultimately was a defining moment of his campaign and one he attributes to his loss to Barack Obama. So the power of these deepfake videos and disinformation campaigns to influence our democratic election process is really unprecedented. We don't know everything yet. The technologies are advancing. The technologies are becoming cheaper. Different countries are excelling at disinformation campaigns internally, as opposed to some countries that are leading, China being number one country leading in disinformation campaigns cross-nationally, so outside of the country. So as the technology costs decrease and sophistication increases, the success of these campaigns might only be in its early stages and leaves us with maybe more questions than answers right now. Overall, I think it's important to note that the research and the evidence does demonstrate that disinformation erodes trust in society and democratic institutions. And the American public is not completely blind to this. A 2020 study by the Institute for Public Relations found that 74% of Americans report seeing news or information that misrepresents reality at least once per week. 50%, nearly half, report seeing misinformation every day. 77% of them, however, felt at least somewhat confident in their ability to recognize new news or information that misrepresented reality. More than 2/3 of Americans say disinformation is a threat to democracy and undermines the election process. And interestingly, and I think speaks really strongly to Bob and Rick and Mara, both Democrats and Republicans agreed that local news outlets are one of the most trustworthy media sources. But unfortunately, as you know, and this is according to a 2020 report, the US has lost 2,100 newspapers, leaving at least 1,800 communities that had a local news outlet in 2004 without any local news outlet in 2020. This is referred to as the news desert. So, in conclusion, social media was once heralded as a force for freedom and democracy. And as you know, it's come under increasing scrutiny for its role in amplifying disinformation, inciting violence, and lowering levels of trust in media and democratic institutions. A strong democracy requires access to high quality information and an ability for citizens to come together to debate, discuss, deliberate, make concessions, and so forth. So I'd like to leave you with these questions for further consideration. Are social media platforms really creating a space for public deliberation and democracy? And/or are these platforms merely amplifying content that keeps citizens addicted, disinformed, and angry? Because of the tremendous rise of disinformation and deepfake videos spread via social media, it is important to continue having these conversations, hosting these panels, and engaging in dialogue with the public at large, and the ongoing study of disinformation campaigns in order that we might better prevent, better understand how it's spread and therefore prevent that spread. I'd just like to note 2 resources that you might want to look at to follow up with. The 2020 Institute for Public Relations Disinformation and Society report and the Oxford Computational Propaganda Research Project in 2019 Global Inventory of Social Media Manipulation report. So a couple of resources, I'm happy to post those in the chat box as well. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Dodd. What a great insight. I'll tell you what, there's an old saying that says a lie told often enough becomes the truth. And we certainly have seen that, haven't we? It is wonderful to hear that background. One of the things I'd be very interested to, when we get into the Q&A, have you address this strange phenomenon of QAnon briefs. This is just bizarre, but we'll save that one for the Q&A period. And one of the things I would like to remind everybody, of course, if you've just joined us, if you've come in the middle of the program, is that this is called The Perversion of Truth, Media and Democracy, brought to you by the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. We're found on the web at www.scpaflorida.com. And anybody that would like to join us, you'll find a little box on there. You can click on it, join the SCPA. It's a very low cost membership. And of course, you can contribute as well. We certainly, it costs quite a bit of money actually for us to operate our group. And we certainly appreciate any help from anybody that would like to pitch in. So thanks for that. I typically would ordinarily invite our treasurer to speak, but I think she's not available right now. But Paul, do you see her up? I think Carol.
Yeah, she's here.
Carol, are you with us?
Let me unmute her. See if she'll join.
Carol usually does that pitch for us to encourage people to join or contribute.
Carol's there.
I think you said everything, Phil, at scpaflorida.com. Log on, join, contribute. And we're also on Facebook, Space Coast Progressive Alliance.
Thank you very much, Carol. I appreciate it. And thank you very much for serving as our treasurer. We really appreciate that, too. Hey, those of you that are interested in asking questions, here's a chance to kind of start getting ready. Remember, if you click the participants button, there's a little thing on the bottom that has a little button that says raise hand. So when it comes time to ask those questions, you should be able to raise your hand. Paul will be helping select folks to ask questions. We always ask you to be sure that you are asking a question as opposed to just making a statement, and we'd like to limit you to 2 or 3 minutes. And before we get to that, we have a few candidates that are with us today, and I'd like each of those candidates.
We have 4.
We have Daniel McDowell, Phil Moore, Alton Edmond, and I think Samantha Nazario right now. So I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and ask each of our candidates to introduce themselves. Tell us what office you're running for, why it is you would like people to vote for you. This is very short, basically the 2-minute elevator speech, but let's start with Daniel McDowell. Daniel, are you with us? Are you available to log in? And you've got the floor for 2 minutes.
All right. Well, thank you, Phil. And I'm Dan McDowell, and I'm running for West Melbourne City Council. This is my first run into political office. I want to say, as a member or as a board member of the Progressive Alliance, thank you all. The speakers were fabulous. So I really appreciate, and I learned a great deal tonight. So thank you for that. And for the folks on Zoom tonight, as well as the folks following us on Facebook, welcome. And we have this first Thursday, which is the second Thursday show educational program. And I have a little bit of background noise, so I apologize for that. But my first time up is I'm learning a great deal. I've done a lot of training in the last year and a half for this campaign. And they tell me to don't lie, be truthful, and be prepared for what people will come after me with. And that's part of the responsibility I think I take. danmcdowell.com, I can go into a lot of detail about what exactly my platform is and the policies, but I'm not going to do that for the group tonight. I will say that things that I do feel very strongly about is challenging the norms, being respectful, being proactive, energetic, evidence-based, and focused. And please measure me by the mile, not the minute. And with that said, I also have a pledge that I will hold high integrity and do my very best. So thank you all, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for running for office. Anybody that puts their hat in the ring certainly gets a nod from me. Next up, Phil Moore. Are you on the line, Phil? I don't know.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here, Phil.
Phil, you've got 2 minutes. You have the floor. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. I'm running for office because we need to deal with the broken unemployment system that continues to affect millions of Floridians, including myself. In order to do that, we need representation in Tallahassee for the working class citizen, like myself, a person who works 2 jobs in order to make a living. The incumbent has spent his last 4 years in office dividing people, attacking constituents, making despicable comments on social media, and abusing the office. I'm running to get back to elected officials acting professionally and like adults. If reelected, we are in for more of the same childish behavior and divisive rhetoric, like his attempt to close UCF and 2 smaller universities, and his threat to dissolve the City of Palm Bay's charter. The incumbent has done more fighting Brevard and burned more bridges in his past 4 years than fighting for Brevard. I'm running to be a voice for those who are homeless, can't afford housing or medical care, and who struggle to make ends meet. I know because I have been there with you. Unlike my opponent, who has attacked the poorest people in Florida, those needing food stamps, where he sponsored a bill to reduce SNAP benefits. I'm running to be a voice against discrimination, against racism, and to fight for equal rights for all. Unlike my opponent, who will gaslight a racist tweet on the funeral of John Lewis or dog whistle a racist Facebook post on equating a protest for his fireworks display to that of the protest for Black Lives. I'm running because we need leaders who deal in science and facts, not personal attacks, in order to address this pandemic and future emergencies. My name is Phil Moore, and I'm running to be your next state representative. I'm asking for your support and your vote. Please go to votephilmore.com to find out more information on my platform and to make a contribution. Remember, in November, you deserve more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phil. It's good to have you tonight. Alton Edmond, was in the audience. Alton, are you here?
I'm still here, Phil. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
I
Alton. You've got
appreciate
the
that
floor.
wonderful radio voice introduction, man. I love your voice. Again, my name is Alton Edmond, and I'm running for Brevard County Sheriff. I'm running for Brevard County Sheriff because it's time for the people of Brevard County to have a community-oriented sheriff's department. What do I mean by community-oriented? I mean a sheriff that shows up for more than just a picture and a kiss of a baby. I mean a sheriff that's actually invested in the community. I mean a sheriff that's going to get his hands dirty, roll up his sleeves, get out there in the community and do what needs to be done. I've been volunteering in schools. I've been volunteering in churches, and I am the sheriff that is going to make sure that there is law and order and that there is a community-oriented relationship such that we can bond together and resolve the different issues that are facing Brevard. I'm running for sheriff so that we can have accountability in the sheriff's department, so that when people put citizens at risk within BCSO, they are punished and they are removed from the office, so that the citizens of Brevard County can be safe and can depend on their law enforcement agencies to keep them safe. I'm running because civility is on the ballot. A sheriff that uses his office to bully and to harass and to make fun of citizens is not good. And it's time for us to change the narrative. We can work together as a community, we can solve crimes, and we can still do so in a way that humanizes people. And I'm running for Brevard County Sheriff because transparency is something that you deserve from your sheriff. Transparency in the budget, the $140 million budget that is being hidden from the public and from the taxpayers that contribute to it is very important and something that I support wholeheartely. Currently, if you want to request any records from BCSO, it'll cost you at least $81 an hour for someone to retrieve those items, even though your tax dollars already pay for them. Cocoa, Titusville, and many other cities and governmental agencies here in Brevard have public budgets. You can go on their websites, hit the search bar, and pull it up. But with BCSO, the process is made as difficult and as expensive as possible. And also administrative transparency is important. When it comes to the Gregory Edwards situation and the hiding, purposeful concealment of the video recording of his last moments, that's something that needs to be shown, something that needs to be released, and an issue because my brother, who's a Marine, if it were him, I would demand that same justice for him. And so I demand that justice for Gregory Edwards. And body cameras and other things that are needed all go to transparency that our sheriff has been fighting for far too long. I'm the candidate that's here for reform. I'm here for positive change, and I am here for the community. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you. You can check me out at altonforsheriff.com. You can look us up on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Alton Edmond for Sheriff. And we do have a fundraiser coming up not too far from now. So feel free to look that up, click that link, and register to attend. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And again, I am Alton Edmond, running for Brevard County Sheriff.
Thank you, Alton. We appreciate that. Thank you for being here again. Samantha Nazario, Samantha, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone. I want to thank you all for Daniel, actually, for letting me in on this wonderful experience today. Thank you to all your speakers and everyone that is a member of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. My name is Samantha Nazario. I'm one of the 2 Latin candidates in the entire city of Melbourne. I am actually an advocate and an ambassador. I've been an ambassador for the Bleeding Disorder Coalition of Florida for 4 years. I've been a volunteer for the Hemophilia Foundation of Greater Florida for 14 years. I've been a Brevard Public School super mom for the last 14 years. So this is a new arena for me. I am more of an advocate and a community activist. I came into this race because we need a change in Brevard County, in our cities. It needs to represent more of the demographic that actually lives here and partakes and works. We need to build bridges and not walls, let's say. We need to build bridges for information for the community. my main purpose and platform and my passion is children. We have a huge homeless children's problem in Brevard County that needs our immediate, eminent attention. It's not something we can turn the other way and act like it's not here anymore. We have lots of work to do here in Melbourne. I'm up for the challenge. Like I said, this is a new arena for me. I am great at advocating. I advocate for a lot of different communities and causes. Quite a few people on here are very good friends of mine, including the amazing candidate for Melbourne. Look very forward to working with Mr. Moore in the future on Medicaid expansion, on accumulator, what do you call them? Copay accumulator bills and all kinds of different things that we can get together and work on. I look forward to building bridges between our seniors and our youth. We need to show our youth that there's more than just a street corner to hang out. We need to give our kids somewhere safe to go. We can't keep being Melboring and expecting our kids to not get in trouble, not do the wrong thing where there's nothing for them to do in Brevard County. So we definitely need more community action and community engagement in every city in our county. We need more inclusion and we need a lot more demographic representation. Our council should represent the people that live here of all ages and cultural backgrounds, ethnicities. We all deserve a place at the table. And thank you so much for taking the time to hear me today.
Thank you so much, Samantha. And I'll tell you what, the Space Coast Progressive Alliance does not endorse candidates. That's part of our founding documents. And that's a very important but, that is that we always remind people, please get engaged. Please do something. Don't just think about the candidates at the top of the ticket. Everybody wants to look at the president and the presidency, but it's important to support your local candidates. It's really here at the local level that things happen that affect our lives. So pick a candidate, any party, any office. Support that candidate with your time, with your money, with your effort, but most importantly, vote. This is a time of the year when we need to be encouraging everyone to vote. This is, as I've said before, and I believe that it's true, this is probably the biggest election, the one that has the most impact of our lives on so many levels for so many reasons. We have many wonderful candidates, and frankly, it's time to get engaged any way that you can. So thanks again for our candidates. Do we have any other candidates? I was looking through the list. I didn't recognize anybody.
We have somebody that wants to ask a question, however.
Well, it's about time for that. I think it is time for us to go ahead and encourage people that if you have a question, just go into the little participants box, and there's a little button that you can press to say raise your hand. And once you raise your hand, we'll call on you, and it's time for a question. So a question for our panel.
First one is DP.
DP. Yes. Alrighty. Okay,
well,
DP, you have the floor.
Sorry. Well, I don't necessarily have a question per se, but I do want to open up the floor to the panelists to kind of elaborate on what I've got to say here. I wanted to touch on the Q phenomenon just a little bit because I've been following that since it started in late 2015. And it started on 4chan, basically, with a very small group of conspiracy theorists that surrounded one account. And this account had a unique ability to I don't know if very many people know about 4chan, but user IDs. It was an anonymous board and user IDs had specific numbers. This account had a unique ability to generate user IDs that made him kind of seem godlike. I believe it was connected with use of a large amount of computer power. But what this account would do is it would post a list of questions that were designed to tie into the conspiracy theories of the accounts that surrounded it. It started off innocently enough as just a very small group of conspiracy theorists, but it was very quickly picked up on by the use of foreign Twitter bots. Basically, these bots would pick up these questions and then they would start to theorize and post on Twitter, and other bots in the network would amplify those, like was being elaborated on by the panelists. They would amplify, and what that means is they would share, they would comment on, and so forth. They would amplify these theories out onto the Twitter sphere. And this has been going on ever since early 2016. and it's been growing ever since due to the manipulation of the algorithms. They've figured out a way that, you know, once you amplify a message enough, the algorithms pick up on it and they put it at the top of people's feeds and stuff like that. Anyway, I just wanted to put that out there because of the unique nature of this whole Q thing, and open up for any further comment on the phenomenon.
Who on our panel would like to pick up the response to that, or any or all of you that would like to comment about this bizarre?
I have to light them up. Wait a minute.
Already?
They automatically close when they stop talking. So let me see.
I suspect that Dr. Dodd would probably have some very interesting insights into that.
Thanks so much, Phil. Thanks, Daniel, for your question and for highlighting that this QAnon phenomenon. It's certainly interesting and something to continue following as we approach the 2020 election. I'm not sure if I'm addressing your concerns, but maybe just elaborating on them. To be clear, when we're talking about, as I mentioned, the cyber troops, these are organized these are organized operations. And in fact, QAnon, its mission, what they espouse is that this is information warfare. So they're not even really hiding the fact that what they're trying to do is spread misinformation or to control information and control the narrative. That's what they're espousing as their mission. And it's all based on, of course, as you know, this conspiracy theory about Trump and his dealings with someone named Q and such. But I would also just like to note for the panelists and the viewers' information that Trump has retweeted QAnon linked accounts and information nearly 100 times, and especially one noteworthy day in December, he retweeted QAnon content 20 times in one day, in fact. And so he's not, as we know, he's not avoiding the spread of disinformation or misinformation or, you know, checking his sources necessarily either as the leader of our country.
Do any of our other panelists want to weigh in on this QAnon phenomenon? Paul, is everybody live? All four of our panelists?
Yeah, they're all live. Yeah, we have Peter Mingay who wants to ask a question.
Peter, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Oh, good evening, everybody, and thank you for putting on this fantastic evening. I'm over in Mount Dora. I'm a little bit away from you, but it's been terrifically interesting, and thank you for that. I think you can tell by my accent I'm British. I hope you can understand me. I'm afraid I can't provide subtitles for you, but I'll do my best. I've been living over here for 5 years with my American wife. And I've spent most of my adult life in Europe, mainly in France and Germany. And one thing that I've noticed in the 5 years that I've been here is really the proliferation of policing. There just seemed to be a huge number of police. I mean, somewhere like Mandora is quite a small place, but we have a huge police department with a large number of bodies, a large number of vehicles and the expense that goes with that. And the reason I'm saying that is that there seems to be a false narrative that is presented, and I'm not really sure where it comes from. Maybe it's the police, I'm not sure, but this false narrative that crime is very high and there is a very high fear of crime and that a high level of policing is the solution to that. And I often have to reassure people that my fear of crime is considerably less here than it was in any of the areas I've lived in, and I've lived all over the world. In any other part of the world, I feel incredibly safe here. Now, of course, people say, oh, that's because we have lots of police. but of course, you know, I'm really not sure that's true. And I think maybe the question is perhaps aimed at Rick. Oh, and can I say, Rick, by the way, I was horrified to hear you describe yourself as old at 59. That was completely horrific. And so really, Rick, it's really, where do you think this fear of crime comes from? And also, you know, the idea that more police is the way that we deal with that, rather than, say, providing mental health professionals, youth workers, social workers, that kind of thing. There strikes me there's a huge amount of money spent on policing that could be more usefully spent elsewhere. So there you go.
Yeah, well, since the 90s, if you want to get elected, just say you're going to put more cops on the street, and that will get you elected. It's politically popular to say you're going to put more cops on the street, and both parties have done it. Bill Clinton in the 90s, and the current president is. The more you say law and order, you use the key word there, Peter. Is it's a fear of crime, even though the reality is that crime has consistently, especially violent crime, has consistently gone down. So.
And I'd like Bob Gabordi to weigh in as well. Bob, you in your opening comment were covering the topic as well.
Well, what has not been as politically popular is to say we need more money for training, we need more money to pay a decent wage to attract higher quality police officers, or to keep our good ones, and that I wouldn't mind spending the same amount of money on police and have it go to improve the quality of what we're getting. Not that not being critical of individual police officers, but no one ever talks about that and the need for more training or to a more diverse police force. So let's try that.
Or mental health for police. I mean,
right.
The suicide rate among law enforcement is growing all the time, and you want to talk about mental health. Florida is something like 48th or 49th in the country in public spending on mental health. It's abysmal, but that's not a sexy sell. I mean that to voters, and it's a hard mental health and mental illness is a very hard problem and a hard nut to crack, and it takes sustained effort and treatment and it's expensive, and it's easier just to wave solutions out there that make people feel good.
And would either of our other speakers, our other panelists, like to weigh in on this?
No, doesn't look like it.
All righty. And by the way, thank you, Peter, for climbing Mount Dora so that we can hear you all the way from there. It's great to have you aboard.
Okay, it's great. Thank you again.
You're welcome. Do we have another question?
Next we have Raed Al-Shabi, our Vice President, wants to ask a question.
Good. Raed, you have the floor.
Thank you, gentlemen. Enjoyed every minute of this discussion today. Two questions, and I know we're running a little late here. Money influence in media and the lobbyist in the media. I know probably Bob can weigh in a little more because of his experience, and I can feel the emotion in him. And can we counter bad media with the growth of social media? I don't know if it's not there. I'll elaborate.
Yeah, could you explain a little bit more what you're asking?
Right now there's a lot of influence on media by lobbyists that are out there, and also by a lot of money that can be influencing the direction of stations or the news media. That's one question, and how much of that is a factor. The second question is, if there is bad media, can we, as public, can we counter that bad media with a lot of influence from social media, Twitter, from Facebook, from other sources? Are we capable of defeating bad media?
With citizen journalists, I think is where you're going.
Yeah, I don't think it. Let me start with that, and also I'd like to ask that the current editor of Florida Today weigh in on this as well. Especially the part about the influence of money and lobbyists on the media. But on the second part, where you're talking about countering I don't think it's an either or, and I don't think it's a kind of thing that, you use one to counteract the other. They're separate kinds of things, although, I don't know if this is still true or not, but at one point, Facebook was saying that 80% of its, news that is on Facebook was coming from mainstream media, and that people that Rick referred to as saying that why do they feel like they don't need media because they have social media. It's kind of, to me, like saying we don't need farmers because we have grocery stores, so I don't think that it's one or the other. They're separate things. They have separate roles to play. I use social media for primarily for relationship kind of things, my friends, and talking about either what's going on in my life and what's going on with my book and that kind of thing. Although I do go to Florida Today's web Facebook page, and I read information from legitimate news sources for social media, but I don't long way of saying I don't think it's an either or kind of thing.
And Mara, your name was used in vain. Would you like to weigh in, please?
No, sure. Yeah. I mean, in terms of, I can only speak to Florida Today and that perspective, but to some degree, as media has gotten smaller, there's probably even more freedom in the newsroom now than there was, a decade or so ago. We don't have publishers anymore, which means the newsroom is very, the structure is different. And that's not to say publishers are a source of evil, but, publishers had different, sometimes agendas and things. And so that's gone. So I, don't feel any of that pressure on a local level from lobbyists or in that sense. Where I think it is, of course, it's an industry that's struggling and you're constantly aware of that. And you have, staff on furlough and you're trying to, budget your money. And there's pluses and minuses of being part of a big company like Gannett. But one of the pluses is, as I think many in this community know, we have brought a lawsuit to challenge the sheriff's decision not to release the video on Gregory Edwards. And that's an expensive process. And that's something that, having that corporate ownership and money there is allowing us to do. So, there's good and bad, but I don't feel or see a pressure in that front. I mean, one thing that I think, and this is something nationally that I definitely pay attention to, as media moves more and more towards a subscriber base as opposed to advertising, I think that presents its own risks. As subscribers, again, there was a very good column in the New York Times about that and about the danger sometimes of kind of, preaching sort of to the choir and wanting to do journalism that reinforces that and brings more subscribers. I think it's still in very early days. So I think that's more a fear in the future, but it's something to pay attention to.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's very interesting. I have to say, in the past 3.5 years, I've subscribed to more papers than ever before. But my wife and I have been subscribers for Florida Today for 26 years, as long as we've lived in Brevard. And I have to say, I've often been involved in the community over the years, doing many different things. And it is remarkable to me that you can be in a city or county board meeting, and there's Dave Berman, or you can be out in the woods cleaning up, doing oyster restoration, and through the reeds, out comes a reporter, and there is
Jim Waymer.
Jim Waymer, absolutely.
Right.
And everywhere in between. I mean, in school board meetings, at events around this county, I have found that Florida Today has carried the story, and in my opinion, carried it well and fairly. So, I'm one voice saying, hey, you got to support your local newspaper. And I know there have been at least 2 studies that show that when a local newspaper dies in a community, many things happen that people don't expect. One of the things that happens is your taxes go up. And the reason is that when politicians, local officials feel that they're not being watched and there's no reporting, corruption erupts at a level that's never before seen. And that costs people money. So support your local newspaper in any cost. By the way, any of our other panelists want to pick this one up, the issue of money influencing journalism?
We have time for just one more question.
Alrighty. Well, who is it? Do we have one, Paul?
We have one from one of the coordinators of tonight's event, Larry Abdullah, is going to ask a question.
Larry, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just want to say first that as of our last meetings, we had 200, 300 or so on Facebook media, so we have a much greater presence. This was a tremendous presentation, reinstates my desire to continue my 30-some year subscription to Florida Today. To hear these wonderful editors speak of their experience, and I know they toe the line in this sometimes conservative county. I want to ask, as far as Facebook and resisting, to Melissa, as far as Facebook resisting their putting down of known false media, and they're saying, this token that they're going to do something in the last week. What's happening with them and their subsidiaries?
The question was directed to him.
Melissa.
Thanks for your question, Larry. I can't necessarily speak to the specifics of what's going on with that, but I think more broadly speaking, it's a really important consideration for all of us communicators, journalists, consumers of media moving forward to consider what it means when Twitter and Facebook and other social media outlets and platforms, which are for-profit platforms, what it means when they're the ones tagging. They have different systems in place now that they're still really in the early stages of development, but when they're the ones who decide what is misleading information and then tag it accordingly. So some of Donald Trump's tweets have been tagged by Twitter. I think that's an important power move by the platform, but then as I think we all know, Donald Trump and the government will attempt to punish or legislate against the operation of those platforms and its leaders. And so we have this sort of back and forth that plays out in social media, much like we've seen in traditional media in the past. And so it's sort of, I think, returning to all of our early academic media studies, it's sort of this gatekeeper who decides what information we receive, and with the social media platforms, who tags that information, whether it's misleading, who takes down the videos, who identifies misinformation, and that's a subjective piece in large part.
Would anybody else on our panel like to handle that as well? Well, I'll tell you what, one of the things that I always like to ask our panelists at each of our meetings, and that is, what would you like our audience to take away from this event? What action would you like them to do as you have an audience right now and they're looking to you? What would you like them to do? What kind of action item? Could each of you tell our audience, what would you want them to do? What do you want them to take away from this event tonight? And let me just go in order with you. So first, Bob, what would you like people that are watching you, listening tonight, to take away from this event as an action item?
Is it okay to say, buy my book?
Sure. That'd be okay.
I would like the conversation about media to continue. and not be a one night kind of thing to think about, because it is such a critical issue right now, and will be through November and well past November. And to keep that in mind, that, you know, this is an important election, and it's an important election for the future of media as well.
Indeed. Rick Brunson, what would you like people to take away from tonight's event? What kind of action item would you like to give them as they're listening?
What you just said, listening. It's so important. Listening to people that may not agree with you or may not share the same worldview or outlook that you do. There's not enough of that going on, and we do need to listen. The question that I get asked all the time that drives me up a wall is a friend or someone will say, "Why isn't the media covering blank?" And you fill it in, and I probably get that question from somebody 3 times a week, you know, and my impulse is just to rip into them, you know, and you ignoramus, that your contempt is never gonna build any bridges with anybody. And so what I try to do is, you know, quickly send them 3 links, usually to my local, you know, one of my local news organizations that has covered whatever it is they're saying that has been covered, and they just haven't been paying attention. And then I just say, hey, you eat local, consume your news local. It's healthy for you, and eat a balanced diet. You know, I subscribe to the New York Times, which leans left. I subscribe to the Wall Street Journal, which leans right. We have to all get out of our own bubbles. It's the problem that we're in right now as a country, is everybody has stitched their own media bubble, you know, and their sources of confirming information around them, and nobody's talking. So, you know, I love to continue the conversation, dial down the contempt, and listen.
Words of wisdom. Mara Bella.
Could I jump back in there for just a second? Something that Rick said about being asked that question about why is media not covering such and such. Oftentimes, my answer to that would be because it's not true. And you know, they would present us with, you know, something that they heard, that they read on social media, that, you know, their friends were talking about, or they heard on Fox or whatever, and it just wasn't true. And we'd look at it, but we're not right about it. So that would be another answer that I would have.
Hey, Bob, if I could interrupt you for just a second, a message just popped up here, and somebody's asking, how can they get an autographed copy of your book?
Go to gabordimedia.com, and that's the best way to get a copy. It's Gabordi, like my last name, media.com, and I'm happy to sign copies of the book.
Excellent. Mara, you're next. What would you like people to take away from our event tonight? And we're running out of time, so we'll ask you to try to keep it a little short, but what kind of action item would you like people to have tonight?
Well, I'll go very fast. 1, of course, support local media. Get a subscription. That's really easy. Number 2, check your sources before you share something on social media. Do a little research before you push that button. And if you see something in Florida today that you don't like, that you think is wrong, reach out to us. Reach out to the reporter who wrote the story. Reach out to their editor. Reach out to me. Don't just stand out there and say fake news or illegitimate media. Reach out. Thank you.
And write a letter to the editor. You guys have a wonderful policy of publishing opinions left, right, and center. And finally, let's see, Dr. Dodd, what would you like to leave people with as an action item from tonight's event?
Thanks, Phil. I guess I will leave you where I started. Just a reminder, words are important. Words are powerful. Words have an impact. What we say matters. How we say it matters. And so let's start using appropriate terminology, disinformation, to reflect inaccurate, factually inaccurate information as opposed to fake news.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks to all four of our panelists, all of our guests, our elected officials. I'll tell you what, a rousing round of applause to all of you. You would be getting a standing ovation if you were in a live event tonight. And we want you to all think to recognize our gratitude and our thanks to you for your service, not just to your companies, your organizations, but to our nation. At this time of an election, it's critically important that all of us have the truth as we prepare to vote. And I guess if I have an action item for everybody, it's to vote. Please pick a candidate, pick somebody, get involved, do something. The time's running out. You've got to vote. This is the big one. Remember, everybody, we'll be back for October 1st. I believe it is the first Thursday in October. Our presentation will be the last one before the actual election, and it's called On the Edge of Authoritarianism, examining the real-world threats to American democracy and the little historic background of that. Thanks to everyone. Thanks again for our team that put this together tonight. We look forward to seeing you in the future. And by the way, something I always like to mention, I'll leave this with you. Remember, if you disconnect tonight from this meeting and you keep this information to yourself and you don't share it, then we have failed. It is critically important that all of us keep the conversation going. Once we hang up tonight, we need to talk to our friends. We need to share the information that we've acquired tonight, and we need to spread the word. Frankly, it's that will make us a success. It is that will make our democracy flourish into the future. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful night, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Is it off so I can see?
Yeah, it's out.
Huh? Larry? Larry?
I'm